Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Sergio drove up to his house. He liked to sit in the car for a while, turning off the engine and just thinking. Especially in the evening, when the sun was reflecting in the windows of the house. There was so much to think about. He was 40, was a successful surgeon, and had no family. He was married, but his wife had died of cancer 10 years ago. Sergio was alone. He didn't even have children. Where should he go next? They say it's a midlife crisis. Although, according to statistics, for men, 40 is not middle age. Sergio looked in the rearview mirror. His temples had a bright gray hairline. It felt like he was missing something in life, or someone. His ex-girlfriend's name was Maruja. A few years ago they had had a workplace romance. She was a nurse, and he was her supervisor. She was attractive in her uniform, and even more attractive without it. Why did they break up? Apparently, Sergio wasn't serious. At least at that time. When she realized that, it became very difficult to work together. She decided to quit. At that time, she wanted to buy a house. She asked Sergio to help her choose the right house because she expected to build a family in her new home, and she wanted Sergio to be a part of that family. But Sergio and family were not compatible then. The pain of losing his wife still lived in his heart, and he couldn't even think about another marriage. Sergio looked at the house. It was a beautiful, spacious house in the middle of a large plot in a high-end residential area. It was a house with no exterior finishes. You'd think it was still in the process of renovation. However, the previous owners simply didn't have enough money. She decided to leave in quite a hurry. She cut the price of the house to a minimum and sold it for almost nothing. Sergio was the first and, as he wanted to believe, the main candidate. He really liked the location, a dead-end street and only one neighbor's house nearby. The other plots hadn't even been sold yet. There were many flowers that covered the neighborhood in a multicolored carpet. And in winter, well, Sergio hadn't been here in winter yet. He watched the wildflowers, how the wind rustled them, and tried to understand why he decided to move here suddenly. When Maruja called him, she was nervous. It was recently, a month and a half ago. The call was unexpected and even pleasant for Sergio. "Hi," she began the conversation. "How are you doing?" "Well, not bad, I guess." "What about you?" He answered. "You know I bought a house that you and I chose, right?" "Yeah, you told me, and I saw the posts on social media." "Oh, you're checking out my social media? That's nice." "Well, yes, sometimes I check out what you post." "Well, not regularly." "You loved that place, didn't you? I remember you even mentioned that you'd like to live there." "Yeah, it's a great place." "But why do you ask about it? Are you suggesting I move in with you?" "Well, in a certain way, yes. I'm moving, so I'm selling the house. I need to leave urgently, so I'm selling the house for almost nothing. Obviously, the repairs aren't finished, and it's going to take a lot of money, but I think you can afford it. This place is so dear to me, and I didn't want to sell it to some stranger. And you're not a stranger to me." "I'm glad to hear that. But, you know, buying a house isn't the same as buying bread. I have to think about it. Send me the details and the price, please. I'd like to come and see it again." "Sure, tell me when. I'll show you the house and tell you everything." "Sounds great." Sergio was excited. Maybe it was because of the good offer, or maybe it was because Maruja called him. Another relationship was over. He was free and easygoing, full of energy. He wanted to see her, and, well, he hoped it would be more than just a meeting about the house. Perhaps it would lead to some kind of adventure. He quickly found the time and arrived. Maruja met him in a light summer sundress with loose hair. She was in her early 30s, but in this dress, she looked like she was in her 20s. Just like a college girl. Smiling, gentle, kind, cheerful. At this moment she reminded him very much of his wife. She smiled friendly, and he remembered how they had walked around the city at night. They liked sitting by the lake, kissing in the back seat of his car. Maruja hesitated when she had to shake his hand. She didn't know whether to shake his hand or hug him. They both wanted to hug each other, but were afraid to do so because their relationship was over. He made the first step, hugging her by the shoulders in a friendly way. She liked that he sensed her uncertainty and tried to make her feel comfortable. They walked around the lot, around the house, around the neighborhood. Life here was very different, calm, slow. It was only half an hour's drive from the city, but it was as if they were in another world, without the hustle and bustle. It was peaceful. "Why are you leaving?" Sergio asked. Maruja took a long time to answer. "I don't want to be here anymore," her voice trembled. "I don't think this city is really for me. It brings me unhappiness. I can't find myself here. I feel like I need to leave. I realized it a long time ago, and now I'm sure of it." "And why the urgency?" "A friend is moving to another city and offered to rent a house together." "Like when you were a student?" "Yeah," she said. "It's like I decided to go back in time and seek adventure." "Do you think our romance is a failure, too?" Sergio asked Maruja. She smiled sadly and shrugged. "I don't think it's a success," she finally answered. "But I had a good time with you. Anyway, just forget it, it's all in the past." "Do you think so too?" "You never know," Sergio smiled and put his arm around Maruja. "You are a very nice and decent girl, and everything will be fine." As a result, Sergio bought that house. That night ended with nothing but pleasant conversation, coffee, and gingerbread. But he wanted to help her, wanted to be a part of her life, even in such a strange way. About 3 weeks ago he got the keys, and they parted for good. And now he sat in the car, trying to figure out why he was here. What made him come here day after day, and not to his apartment, which was much closer to his work? Sergio sighed and went outside. The area around the house didn't look tidy, the grass needed mowing. In the distance, not far from the porch, the roof of a well was sticking out of the bushes. Branches of young trees surrounded it. For some reason, Sergio thought that the well, in its classic form, was not needed here. But, as an art object, it wasn't bad. He was walking up the porch of the house when suddenly he heard a strange noise, some short bang, and a howl. He looked around. There was no one there. No one at all. No one was supposed to be there at all. His only neighbor didn't live there yet. The other houses were too far away to make such a noise. Sergio thought he was just really tired and there was no noise, he just imagined it. When he lifted his hand again to open the door, he heard that weird howl or scream and some kind of knocking coming from the well. Sergio felt nervous. The well didn't look very tidy. The old triangular, rusty cover over it was blocked with wooden planks on all sides. Maruja certainly hadn't used it or opened it. At best, it was opened by the construction team when they installed the pump and plumbing, but that was before Maruja bought the house. The house had already changed several owners since it was built. Sergio thought that maybe something had fallen off or broken. But then where was the howling coming from? He entered the house and checked the water in the faucet. Everything was working properly, and water was flowing from the faucet, so there was nothing wrong with the mechanism. He went outside. It was getting dark. Looking into the well in the dark was useless anyway. Besides, opening the old well at night was kind of uncomfortable. He was a doctor, so he explained the situation rationally. Something had fallen somewhere. The distorted sound came to his ear in the right way, but his brain made it sound like one of the familiar sounds, the scream from a horror movie. Sergio took the flashlight and walked over to the well. There was a heavy padlock hanging on it. Moreover, the lock was new, shiny, even the paint hadn't come off anywhere. It looked as if Maruja put it there. Then where was the key? Maybe she'd taken it with her? Probably not. Maruja had always lived in an urban apartment and had no idea how to use a well. Besides, she kept everything related to the household part of the house in the closet in the hallway. There were all sorts of items: wire, twine, an axe, nuts, hoses, wallpaper, wooden steps for the porch, a brazier, and even light bulbs. Sergio found 3 keys, one of them seemed to fit. He went back outside and approached the well. Suddenly something fell inside again and there was a loud scream. It was either a screech or a roar. Sergio shivered. He was not superstitious, but in this atmosphere of country life, among the tall grass, for some reason, he involuntarily thought of ghosts and demons. Pulling himself together, he put the key in the lock. It clicked and opened easily. Sergio opened the heavy door and directed the flashlight inside. No one, nothing. The well went deep into the depths with a dark pipe. Somewhere down there water gleamed from the light of the flashlight, and a bucket chain swung slowly beside it. It was strange, for Sergio had not touched it. Why would it swing? And if not him, then who touched it? Perhaps it was mice? There are a lot of mice here. He caught one of them yesterday, luring it with cheese. But it was a small animal, it could not move that heavy chain. Although Sergio felt quite uncomfortable. He slammed the well door shut and locked it. It's better to deal with it in the morning. Besides, if he suddenly needed help, it would be a lot easier to find it in the morning. He walked quickly into the house and, for the first time in a month of living here, locked the door, turned off the lights, and sat down in the living room where he could see the well through the window. He waited. It seemed as if the lock was about to bounce, the door would open itself, and a shaggy hand would appear from there. But nothing happened. Sergio had some whiskey to relieve the tension and went to bed. He locked the bedroom door, too. He woke up early, the sun shining brightly through the windows. He got up quickly, got dressed, and went out into the yard. Everything around was serene, the grass glistened in the morning dew. Somewhere bumblebees chirped and grasshoppers rattled. The padlock was still on the well. He stepped closer and looked around. Nothing unusual. He listened, it was quiet. The wind rustled a little in the branches of the bushes, and birds were singing somewhere. He opened the well and directed the flashlight inside again. Now the chain was no longer swinging, and that made Sergio very anxious. So there really had been something here yesterday. Or someone. He pointed his flashlight at the walls of the well. They were flat, but deep in the well there was a dark spot several meters in diameter. It caught his attention. It was some kind of tunnel. The well was deep. The water began 5 to 7 meters below this mysterious tunnel. "Hey!" Sergio shouted down there. His voice echoed down the well, but there was no response. What's down there in that tunnel? Or there is no tunnel. Maybe Sergio just had a wild imagination, and it was just some bump in the wall. But the only way to find out was to go down there. It would be impossible to do it alone. Actually, if Sergio were a professional climber, he probably could. But his specialty is surgery. If he tries to go down on his own, he will be the one who needs a surgeon. Sergio closed the well and went to seek help from the mayor of the settlement. There was a small but well-maintained house nearby. The construction foreman or local managers often stayed there. Sergio did not even try to understand their hierarchy, but he knew for sure that they would tell him what to do. "I'm not sure," the fat man in his 50s answered, sitting in the mayor's chair. The stubble hadn't been shaved off his face in about 5 days, and it looked as if he wanted to grow a beard. His movements were slow and lazy. He scratched his double chin and continued. "Climb inside the well? But why do you want to do that?" "I'm thirsty," Sergio answered. He couldn't tell them he heard something there, some noises. "You can buy a water cooler, it's much easier. I need to check the inside walls of the well." "Are you an expert?" No, Sergio felt he was losing. "So, why don't you call an expert?" The man looked at him with a tired, ironic look. "Do you have any of those experts here?" "No, the last one just fell off the roof, now he's in the hospital. He won't go down the well for sure." "I see. Is there anyone else?" Sergio was still hoping for help. "I could help. But, you know, I'm too busy." The man sighed tiredly, making it clear that he is in charge here for now. Actually, almost every man here can help you, support you either physically or morally. After all, everyone is sawing or building something, they'll back you up. Although, I would still not recommend you to get into the well. Why not? The soil here is not good, it's swampy and soft. If the walls are really not good, you'll make it worse. And it's really dangerous. What if you fall off? How should we get you out of there? The well is very deep. If I fall off, there will be no reason to get me out. You can bury me there right away. Well, you know what I mean. The man was happy that his interlocutor understood him. Except that Sergio did not plan to give up. What would he need to get down there? Rope, carabiners. Maybe something else? A gun? The idea that there might be something more dangerous than the slippery steep walls was becoming more and more frightening. He decided to call Maruja. He still had her number. She quickly picked up the phone. Maruja? Yes, she answered softly. Hello. Listen, it's a strange story. Actually, how are you doing? Do you like the new city? I'm good. Everything's going well. It's very nice here so far. The city is very beautiful and quiet, with a lot of greenery. Everything is new to me here, so it's very interesting. Did something happen? Sergio hesitated, he didn't know where to start. Well, yes and no. Have you had problems with your well before? The well? Maruja's voice trembled for some reason. Well, yes, why do you ask? Well, there's a new padlock on it. Have you opened it? Did you have a reason to? Oh, you noticed it, yes, I had some problems. So, what happened? Are you having any trouble with it? Well, it may sound very strange, but yesterday I heard something, some noise as if there was someone down there. Maruja was silent, and this silence made Sergio feel unwell. He suddenly realized that his fears were not false. Maruja, are you still here? Yes, she said quietly. So, what is it? What can you say? Sergio, I'll tell you the truth. I didn't leave so quickly just because my friend invited me. I left because of that well. What? I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. Actually, yeah. I don't know how to explain it. I even ended up seeing a psychiatrist, you know? He prescribed me some medication. I don't know what those noises are. They drove me crazy. I became insanely afraid to live there. Tell me everything you know. Sergio tried to remain calm, though his feet and hands were very cold. This always happened when he was afraid. It all started about a month before I sold the house. I started hearing a voice. Like someone was screaming or calling to me. But I couldn't figure out where it was coming from for a long time, and it wasn't consistent. Usually, it happened in the evening. But later, I could hear it more and more often, even in the morning. Did you call the police? Yes, I did. Maruja sounded very nervous as if she were about to cry. When they arrived, everything was quiet. They'd look inside, see nothing, and leave. And in the evening, it happened again. I didn't dare go in there myself, but who could I ask for help? My neighbor Olegario moved out. The others, they do not care. I locked up the well and decided I couldn't live in such conditions anymore. I took it as a sign. It was time to leave, to change everything in my life. I'm sorry I put that on your shoulders. I feel like leaving now, too, Sergio replied, and then he quickly said goodbye and sat down on the grass to think, should he risk climbing into the well or call for professional help? Everything pointed to the fact that it was better not to get in there alone. He pulled out his phone and started looking for professionals. It turned out that there were such people, but their services were not cheap. Maybe he could at least check to see if there was another tunnel. He didn't want to call a professional in vain. Although, Remembering all the thrillers and horrors, he knew he didn't want to be the character who dies at the beginning of the movie. So, he called a specialist. Now all he had to do was wait. Sergio decided to spend the next night in the city in his apartment so as not to complicate his life and not to get nervous unnecessarily. That same evening he got into his car and drove away. For the first time in 3 weeks, he did not want to go back. He wanted to drive as fast as he could, breaking the rules until he crossed the city entrance sign. Finally, I escaped, he thought ironically, and immediately scolded himself for his cowardice. Oh, Maruja, why did you do this to me? He thought. She didn't seem as nice to him now as she used to. Though, the memories of spending nights in the back seat of his car still warmed his heart. The apartment was exactly as he'd left it. It was in high-tech style, clean, neat. He had chosen it with Nadi, his late wife. There were 3 rooms, a bedroom, a living room, and a room for a baby. They hoped to build a family here. After his wife's death, he did not make any repairs and did not take anything away. Everything remained as it was when she was here. Their pictures still hung on the wall, the best ones, where they were both smiling and happy. He was surprised to realize that he hadn't taken them into the house. He moved into his new house with just one small suitcase. Most of his belongings were left in the apartment. Sergio opened the refrigerator, found a bag of semi-finished food, poured himself some wine, and sat down on the soft sofa. He was about to turn on the TV, but he knew he was going to start flipping through the channels thoughtlessly. Surprisingly, he didn't want to think about the house and the well. Everything was left somewhere out there, far away. Here he was seized by memories again. Every corner of that apartment was filled with pleasant memories. A slight, sad smile appeared on his face. He looked somewhere in front of him and saw pictures of the past. Over the years, Sergio took many girls to this apartment. He had so many girlfriends that he couldn't remember their names anymore. The nights flew by with them merrily, unrestrainedly, passionately. But there was nothing left behind, no feelings. His memory took him back not to them, not to these temporary affairs, but to his wife. And sometimes to Maruja, but this seemed strange to Sergio. Sergio just thought he had the same pleasant moments with Maruja as he had with his wife. He slowly drained a few glasses of wine and fell asleep on the couch in a melancholy sadness. He had a nightmare in which his wife turned into Maruja. They were standing somewhere underground, trying to get out of the well, and in the darkness of the well, scary noises grew louder and louder. Someone was approaching. Sergio woke up from the cold and pain in his neck. The couch was not very comfortable, and he was not covered by a blanket, so he felt uncomfortable. The clock showed early morning. He pulled the curtains open. The day promised to be overcast. Today was his day off. He was working in shifts, so he could leave the city for the whole day. And that's what he did. There was no rain outside the city, but the heavy clouds did not make the atmosphere very pleasant. Here the massiveness of the sky made him feel like a nobody. He arrived as usual, parked in front of the house, and this time he grimaced in displeasure. Why had he bought this house? For what? For some kind of new life? What nonsense! His indignation was interrupted by another car that pulled up and stopped nearby. A young man got out. Hello. Is it you who needs to go down the well? Yes, Sergio answered and pointed to the well in the bushes. What happened? I want to check the walls. I don't like the quality. Sergio thought it was not a good idea to tell the truth. Okay. Let's not waste time, the man answered and took out a toolbox from the car. After half an hour he was ready to climb down. His name was Demetrio. He fastened the carabiner to the rope, threw the rope down, switched on the light on his helmet, and dove into the depths. Sergio was waiting for him at the entrance to the well. He hoped that now Demetrio would shout to him that everything was all right. His fears were false. There was no hole in the wall, and therefore there was no one who lived there either. You have a hole here. A voice was heard. Shit. Sergio cursed. Is it a big one? Very big, Demetrio answered. A man could easily get through it. This information made Sergio even more anxious. "Can you go inside and see what is there?" he asked. "No, absolutely not." Demetrio answered that it is very dangerous. This tunnel is not strengthened in any way and could collapse at any time. "Can you see where it goes?" "Point the light there." "I can hardly see anything." "It must be a long tunnel with curves," Demetrio said and began to climb out. "Thank you for your help." "No problem," Demetrio answered and took the payment. When Demetrio was about to leave, Sergio stopped him. "Demetrio, can I ask you to stay here for half an hour? I will pay for your time, but this time I will go down." "What for?" "It's very dangerous. I want to find out what's going on." Suddenly there was a shriek from inside the well and a bang of something heavy. "What the hell is that?" Demetrio was more frightened than Sergio. "That's what I want to find out." Demetrio agreed to stay. However, the price of his services almost doubled, even though now Sergio was going down into the well, and Demetrio was just supposed to help him. Sergio put on his gear and listened to how and what to use. Years ago, when he was still a teenager, he used to go hiking. He had even been in the mountains a couple of times, so he had some memories of how to climb down a steep wall with a rope. He got through the door and bounced off the edge, gradually lowering the rope. The encouraging voice of Demetrio came from above, reminding him to move slowly, one step at a time, leap after leap. The lower Sergio climbed, the harder it was to understand what Demetrio was saying. His voice echoed off the walls of the well and became an indistinguishable babble. "I wonder," thought Sergio, "if I need help and I call him, will he understand me?" However, he quickly chased the thought away. He went down slowly and carefully, and in a few minutes, he was near the entrance to the mysterious tunnel. It was very dark here, the light from above was hardly penetrating there. It was so dark that Sergio felt very uncomfortable. Sergio pointed a light in the tunnel. The tunnel was definitely made by a man, it wasn't just soil erosion or some other natural process. Suddenly Sergio heard an incomprehensible sound again, coming from deep inside the tunnel. He uncovered the knife he had taken with him. Now he was pretty sure he needed it. He stepped into the tunnel and unhooked the carabiner from the rope. He fixed the rope so that if he returned in a hurry, he could quickly grab it and climb up. He agreed with Demetrio that if something happened, Demetrio would pull him up and help him to get out quickly. However, Sergio wasn't sure was possible. He walked slowly, it was slippery and damp, and small streams of water ran along the walls. The tunnel was really quite unreliable. It seemed that if he leaned against a wall, the ceiling would collapse. At one point he saw mice running somewhere, bugs and worms crawling around. The deeper he went, the worse the smell became. It was stuffy, damp, and it smelled like something rotten. With every step he took, the stench became worse, and he had to walk with his head down. Sometimes he hit the ceiling with his helmet, which crumbled a little and blocked the light of the flashlight. Small stone crumbs got behind his scruff, and sometimes water dripped there. It was disgusting. Sergio shuddered at every cold drop and cursed his curiosity. Suddenly he saw that the tunnel was branching out. The fact of the existence of this tunnel itself confused him, and the fact that there was a network was inexplicable to him. Maybe some ancient Neolithic civilization had left these holes? Well, then they were obviously very short. Dwarves? The stuffiness and the overall environment made him feel very bad. The tunnel was getting narrower, the ceiling lower, and he had to crawl on his knees to get through. The thought of being buried alive in here frightened him more and more. When it was too narrow, Sergio made up his mind and said, "Is anyone here?" The silence was the answer. Suddenly, he heard a howl or a scream and a banging somewhere behind him. Sergio turned sharply, as much as the situation allowed, and aimed his knife back. But there was no one there. There was only a dark, frightening tunnel in front of him. Should he follow the sound or move forward? Depends on why he was doing it all. If the goal is to find someone, he should follow the voice. And if the goal is to survive, it is better to stay away from the creature that made that shriek. He decided to crawl forward a little more, but the tunnel became too narrow, and a flashlight showed that there was a dead end. If there had ever been a passageway, it had been blocked. Sergio backed up, and as soon as he had a chance to turn around, he quickly crawled forward. Soon he was back at the fork in the tracks. He was seized by terrible anxiety and a desire to get out of there as soon as possible. However, he knew that the answer was close. I hope it's not a bear, he thought for some reason. He didn't want to get into a den with a bear. Even though his experience as a surgeon taught him to wield a scalpel and other small cutting objects, it did not mean that he would be able to assess the situation reasonably and save himself in such conditions. I've had enough adventures. He cursed and headed down the new corridor, away from the exit. Here the walls were getting wider and wider, and the ceiling was higher. It made Sergio a little happier, at least there was space to wave his arms around. He hoped there was only one creature here. For some reason, he kept assuming it was some animal that settled here. The corridor made a sharp turn and Sergio noticed that the lighting changed slightly, as if another source of light had appeared. To check this, he even dared to take a dangerous action. He turned off the flashlight and stopped. His eyes quickly adjusted to the darkness, and he suddenly noticed a slight blue light in the distance. This light spread evenly along the walls and was reflected slightly in the drops of water. Some rustling could be heard from there as well. Sergio took a few more steps in that direction, and the light became even more distinct. He switched on the flashlight and clutched the knife even harder. Around the corner, the walls parted, and the flashlight beam illuminated a spacious room looking like a cave. The space was quite large, and the height of the ceiling allowed him to finally straighten up. There were barrels and racks along the walls, with open empty cans and empty jerrycans on them. There was a small lantern, which flickered with a low LED light. And a pale, skinny, dirty person was lying on the floor, crouching in pain. A man. He was breathing slowly and looked like he was already dead. His eyes were open, but almost unresponsive to the light of the flashlight and to the unexpected guest. Sergio quickly approached and checked his pulse and pupils. He looked around and grabbed the first canister he could find and opened it to make sure there was some water left in it. Lifting the man's head, he let the water touch his mouth, and the man began to greedily swallow every drop. The man was exhausted. He didn't have the strength to hold the canister. As he tried to sit up, he collapsed again, his lips barely moving. It was obvious that he was trying to say something. But all he managed to do was to make a howling sound. And when he accidentally tapped his foot on a metal barrel that stood next to it, a rumble echoed throughout the cave and corridors. The puzzle was solved, no monster, just a human. Sergio carefully examined the victim. This time he did it without fear. He found several festered abrasions, hematomas, and a fractured rib and arm. The guy was in a very bad condition. He needed professional medical care urgently, but how to get it here? He pulled out his phone and tried to make a call, but there was no connection. To call an ambulance or rescue team, he would have to get out of there first. But during this time this man can die. Then they won't have to bury him, he's already buried in this tunnel, he thought for some reason. Sergio chased the cynical thoughts away and began to assess the situation. He was unlikely to be able to carry him on his back. He needed to be very careful with his injuries. A stretcher would be a good idea. The tunnel was not too wide, but the stretcher would have fit. And then they will need to get the guy up somehow. What is your name? Sergio asked the man. He tried to answer something, but his lips were trembling silently. It was impossible to get any information at this moment. I will help you get out of here, but I cannot do it alone. I have to get out of here and call for help. Wait for me. Sergio took his hand, squeezed it tightly, and in response he felt a faint handshake. He got the answer to the question that tormented him. The absence of a monster in this tunnel made it a little less stressful to be here. Except, it was still possible to accidentally bury yourself alive. He headed toward the exit. Where had that miner come from? Who was he? How long had he been here? Did Maruja know about him, or she could only hear the sounds and nothing more? If the noises started a month before the sale of the house, then he must have been here for about 2 months. There were remains of canned food and jerry cans in the cave. Is this some kind of bunker in case of a nuclear war? How long is it possible to survive here without communication with the outside world? Judging by the victim's appearance, he could have made it into the Guinness Book of World Records. Sergio got to the well, hooked the carabiner, and shouted to Demetrio. He began pulling the safety rope and helping Sergio up. A few minutes later he was on the surface. The bright light stabbed his eyes, he felt dizzy, and the fresh air filled his lungs and made him cough. "I thought you got lost there and needed help," Demetrio answered. A worried, slightly embarrassed smile froze on his face. "I was going to call 911. "That's right, call 911. "What do you mean?" "There's a man in there." "A man?" Demetrio was shocked. "Yes, I am as shocked as you are. Perhaps you should call them yourself." "I don't even know what to say." "All right." Sergio needed some time to recover. After all, there really wasn't much air in the tunnel. Sergio didn't understand how that guy managed to survive, because he had been there for 2 months. "Emergency service," he heard a stern voice on the phone. "Hello. A man in a half-unconscious state is underground in a tunnel. We need a stretcher and rescuers to get him out through the well." When he said this, he could feel the confusion of the dispatcher. After a few minutes, he managed to explain what happened, told them the address, and explained what kind of specialists were needed to save the man. After talking to the dispatcher, Sergio asked Demetrio to stay here until the arrival of the rescuers. His assistance could be necessary. He agreed, free of charge. Sergio went into the house and soon returned with a small, but reliable crowbar. "What is that for?" Demetrio was wondering. "It is going to be very difficult to get the guy out. We need to remove the well cover." Sergio pushed the edge of the crowbar into the gap and pressed down, and there was a creaking sound. The rusty nails probably snapped. Demetrio joined the effort. He had a crowbar in the car, too. After half an hour, the cover of the well was completely removed. Now the sun was reflecting in the water in the uncovered well. "I have to go down again," Sergio said. "I need to bring the guy some water and maybe some food. By the time the rescuers get here, he might just die." Demetrio nodded and offered his help. Sergio brought water from the house. There was soup in the refrigerator. They put it in the blender to turn it into a cream soup. It was all packed. Sergio put on his backpack, hooked a rope to himself, and stepped into the well. Now his movements were confident and precise. This time he was inside in less than half a minute. Now he walked quickly. The distance was very short. In a few minutes, he was standing near the guy. He was alive and seemed very happy now he had a chance to survive. Sergio gave him water and fed him. It was difficult to assess his condition in the light of the lantern, but he seemed to be feeling a little better. It seemed as if life was returning to his body. "Now I have to leave the cave again, but the rescue team will be here very soon," Sergio said. He took his backpack and left. When he got to the surface, 2 vehicles had just pulled up, a rescue team and an ambulance. The rescuers were shocked but ready for anything. Sergio returned to the cave to lead the rescuers to the victim. They loaded him onto a stretcher and slowly carried him to the well, and then they faced the main problem. They had to get him up somehow. The guy was in pain, almost losing consciousness at times. But after half an hour they succeeded in getting him to the surface. He was handed over to the doctors. "Do you know anything about him?" the female doctor asked. "No," Sergio answered. "But he was under your property, wasn't he?" "Yes, but I bought this house a month ago and I don't know anything about him." A nurse came up. "His name is Olegario," he managed to say it. "Olegario?" Sergio was shocked. "I believe he is my neighbor. He lives in that house." "Wow, this is the most unusual way to meet your neighbors." Sergio decided to find out what had happened there. Everyone had left, and Demetrio also left. Sergio entered the house, took a shower, lay down on the sofa, and immediately fell asleep. It was a very difficult day. He woke up early in the morning and he was very hungry. He hadn't eaten anything since yesterday morning. His fridge was empty, so he went to a small cafe in the neighborhood. At the same time, he decided to find out more about his underground neighbor. At the cafe, the deputy mayor was just finishing his morning coffee. "So, did you go down the well?" he asked. "Yeah," Sergio did not even know where to start. "I found my neighbor, Olegario." The deputy mayor choked and put the mug down. "Did you call the police?" He got nervous. "No, I didn't call the police. Olegario is alive. He's in the hospital now." "Thank God." The man felt better. "Do you know him? Can you tell me anything about him?" "Well, you know." The man began to evade the answer. "I can't remember everyone. I mean, I know him by sight, but I've never been in close contact with him. He's been living here for about 15 years. He's a good engineer, especially in underground works. Sometimes we even hired him when we needed to handle soil drainage or something like that. Sometimes it seemed like he knew our settlement better than we did. But Olegario is not a very friendly person. He is very introverted. When he first moved here, he was married. Then tragedy struck in his life. His wife died in a car accident, and he began to live alone. That's all I know." "And how did he end up in your well?" "That is something I want to know too," Sergio answered, finishing his sandwich. "Well, tell me later." The man winked, said goodbye, and left. Sergio was left alone with his thoughts. His first thought was to call Maruja and ask her about everything. But he decided that she probably didn't know everything. So he decided to visit Olegario himself. At the hospital they said he was getting better. He could already eat, drink, hold a glass and a spoon, and slept a lot. Tomorrow he would be transferred from the intensive care unit to a regular room, and then Sergio can visit him. Sergio decided to visit the patient under more normal conditions. Until then, he was tempted to sneak to his neighbor's plot and examine everything there. Especially as he knew for sure that nobody was there now. He climbed over the fence and found himself in an untidy area. No one had mowed the grass here in months. Sergio walked slowly, looking around carefully. There were a few bushes and trees. A small tractor was parked at the gate, and a nice two-story house was in the middle of the lot. Sergio walked up to the porch and pressed the doorknob. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Apparently, the owner of the house didn't think he'd stay underground for so long. The house was clean and tidy. Everything was pedantically in its place. There was a dirty mug with dried coffee marks in the kitchen, and a stale cookie lay on a plate. There were paintings of landscapes on the wall in pleasant, calm, pastel colors. The impression was that the owner of this place was a decent and intelligent man. Sergio walked up the creaky stairs to the second floor. There were 2 rooms there. One was a bedroom. There on the nightstand was a picture of Olegario with some woman, probably his ex-wife. There were iron pants and a t-shirt on the bed and a notebook on the nightstand. Sergio opened it. Looking at the notebook, Sergio realized that Olegario was not the kind of person he first thought he was. A pedant on the outside turned out to be a man of chaos on the inside. The whole notebook was scribbled and scratched. Lots of blots, bold, unrelated, and fidgety notes, unfinished words and abbreviations, and some unfinished drawings. The last note was dated 9 weeks earlier. Maruja's name was scratched out on the page. A shiver ran down Sergio's spine. He flipped through the pages to an earlier period and found a similar portrait, made with a pen, and her nude figure next to it. A few more months earlier, a large inscription saying "Mine." Sergio took the notebook with him. Probably it wasn't right, because by doing so he made it clear that someone had been in the house. But he had to examine that notebook. He left the room and went into the next room. It was an office. Here the clandestine genius was making his ideas come to life. The only word Sergio could use to describe the place was disorder. Crossed-out blueprints were lying on the floor, and books and manuals were scattered on the floor and shelves. A detailed plan of the settlement was tossed on the table, and an optical device, like a modern spyglass, stood by the window. The lens was pointed at Sergio's house, at the bedroom window. There were photos of Maruja on the walls, in different poses, in different moments. It looked like he was following her day and night, snapping photos of her. Perhaps even taking videos as well. A large portrait of her was hanging over the exit like an icon. Sergio opened a desk drawer. There were photo albums. The first one was devoted to Maruja again, but the others were about the other girls. The pictures were done in the same style as if this were the headquarters of the paparazzi. He was spying on them all. Sergio looked carefully at the plan of the settlement. The tunnel between Olegario's house and his house was not the only one. He could find at least 5 other routes to the other houses. Moreover, in some places, they intersected and formed adjacent rooms. Some of the tunnels were crossed over, and one even had a collapse sign and date 2 years ago. Sergio took a picture of the plan and went outside. He wanted to go outside, so he went downstairs and suddenly realized that he hadn't yet seen the whole house, because the stairs also led to the basement. He went there slowly, his feet and hands growing cold again. Though there was no reason to, there was no one else in the house. He opened the door and entered a spacious room. It was a large storage room. Various shovels and building tools hung along the walls, hoses, ropes, and picks. If Sergio were a treasure hunter, he would have found his paradise here. There was also a separate rack with special artifacts. Apparently, he brought them from the houses where the tunnels led. There was a vase with a name on it, a woman's glove, eyeglasses, and a hairpin. It seemed that all these items belonged to different women. Sergio did not see any of Maruja's belongings. There was a barely visible hatch in the floor. He pulled the handle and lifted the door. There was a familiar damp smell from below. The stairs led underground. Here the network of tunnels began. Sergio made his way down, opening the map he had photographed on his phone. He tried to look into it again and find the right route. He wondered where the path to his home was and found it pretty quickly. It started out in a wide room with lots of auxiliary gear, even overalls to work with. The corridor gradually narrowed and eventually led to a rubble blockage. Apparently, his spying plans were ruined by an unfortunate set of circumstances. Olegario found himself trapped in his own dungeon. And getting out through Maruja's well is not an easy task. And when she locked it up, it became impossible. Probably the screams Sergio and Maruja heard were Olegario's attempts to climb up the chain of the well. And several fractures were the result of his unsuccessful attempts. Sergio went back and took a different route. After 50 meters he reached an underground hall, 10 to 15 meters square. Similar to where he had found Olegario. There were crates of canned goods and water supplies. It looked like such rooms had been built in each direction in case of a blockage so that he could wait for help. Smart. Sergio went back into the house and slammed the hatch. In a few minutes, he was already standing outside, trying to figure out what had happened and to understand his attitude about everything he had seen. He obviously lacked information, so he went back to the deputy mayor. This time, he was happy to see Sergio. Apparently, Sergio was bringing some sense of adventure into his life. "Excuse me, what is your name?" Sergio suddenly asked, realizing that they still did not know each other. "Pablo Parra," the man grinned and shook Sergio's hand. "And my name is Sergio." "Yes, I know. After the first conversation about the well, I made some inquiries about you, just to check if you are crazy or not. Did you find out about Olegario too?" "There was no reason to." "Well, almost no reason." "What do you mean?" "Well, he's a very affectionate guy, so to speak. He constantly harassed the girls who lived here. They complained about him." Sergio opened the map on his phone. "And who lives in these houses now?" He asked and pointed to the houses that also had tunnels leading to them. "No one lives there now. Either the houses are for sale or the owners don't come here." Why is that? I have no idea, Pablo Parra answered. Did the women live in these houses? Well, of course. Usually, families buy such big houses, so there were women in almost every house. Got it. Thank you. Sergio decided to continue the investigation on his own. He went to the nearest house, where no one lived anymore, and knocked on the neighbor's door. An elderly woman of about 65 opened the door. She smiled friendly and asked about the purpose of the visit. Sergio introduced himself and said he was looking for the owners of the house next door. The woman waved her hand and said they were nice people, but the girl who lived there was strange. What do you mean? Sergio did not understand. She told that she always felt like someone was watching her, the old woman answered. I even remember she had a nervous breakdown. They called an ambulance. Honestly, I don't like crazy people. Anyway, they left. They shouldn't have left. This place is amazing. Sergio thanked her for the information and left. At every house, neighbors told him the same story. Someone drove them crazy, and people felt something and had nervous breakdowns. They did not like it here and were very suspicious. The result was the same. They moved out. Sergio went back to Olegario's house and walked up to the office on the second floor. He really wanted to find a connection between these houses. Why do these particular houses have a connection? Well, except for the fact that the young girls lived there. He pulled out Sergio's photo albums, pulled out the pictures, and began to look closely. There were girls who looked alike, blonde, fragile, and smiling. They all looked very much like Maruja. Suddenly he realized something. He walked out and opened the door to the bedroom. There was a picture on the nightstand. He picked it up and found the similarities. All the girls looked a lot like Olegario's late wife. Sergio sat down, feeling somehow sad. There was some great tragedy in Sergio's life. The unhappy man was trying to find his beloved in each of these girls. Except he did it in a very strange, perverted way. He took out his phone and called Maruja. Hello, he began. Hello, she answered. How are you doing? Is everything all right? I am fine, thanks. What about you? The same. Sergio didn't know where to start. So, what about the well? She asked. I climbed inside. And what was there? Olegario was there. There was a moment of silence. Maruja? Is he alive? Her voice trembled. Yes, he's in the hospital now. But I think he'll be all right. God, he wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I came home, he was standing at the window, watching me relentlessly. I knew he was watching me. It was unbearable. I was scared to death to live next door to him, and he even snuck into my well? Why? I don't know, Maruja. Maybe he wanted to be closer to you. You reminded him a lot of someone. Leaving was the right thing to do. Yeah, right. I'll let you know what happens next. Thanks, but you really don't have to. I left to avoid dealing with that world. I've got my own world now, and I'm safe here, and nobody's bothering me. I see. Well, goodbye, then. Goodbye. Sergio took Olegario's diary out of his pocket and put it back on the nightstand. He wanted to take a walk. He realized that in the last few days, he had explored the settlement better than he had in all the time he had lived here. It was easier for him to think while walking. This time he was not thinking about the strange neighbor, but about himself. He felt he wasn't much different. Yes, he doesn't dig tunnels, and he doesn't follow his girlfriends, but he also searches, also collects similar girls one by one. He tries to see his late wife in these girls. He likes the smile in one of the girls, the look in another, the third has a good sense of humor, and the fourth is caring and gentle. He still cannot put them together into one, no matter how hard he tries. Because the only special woman, his perfect woman, she died. Sergio stopped and looked around. Perhaps that was the reason why he had moved here. Here he was becoming himself again, even if only for a short time. Sergio called the hospital and asked about the visiting hours. The next day he decided to visit Olegario at the hospital. He bought some fruit and some snacks. Olegario hardly had any friends. It was a small hospital room for 6 people, but in fact, there were only 3 patients there. 2 of them were not in the room at that moment. Olegario was lying on his bed looking out the window. Sergio knocked. "Good afternoon. I am Sergio, the one who found you underground." Olegario looked at him, smiled slightly, and nodded. "Can you talk now?" "Yes," Olegario answered faintly and tried to sit upright, but the pain prevented him from doing so. Sergio helped. "I did not expect to see you under my yard." "Your yard?" Olegario was surprised. "Yes, Maruja hastily sold the house, and I moved in 3 weeks ago," Sergio answered and looked intently at his interlocutor. He became sad and thoughtful. "So sad," Olegario muttered. "Yes, I think so." "How much time have you spent underground?" "I don't know. The rain caused a collapse, and I was trapped in there. If it wasn't for food and water, I wouldn't have survived. My cell phone died in 3 days, so I couldn't keep track of the time." "I know about your tunnels," Sergio replied. Olegario flinched and looked at him intently. Sergio clarified. "About all the tunnels." Olegario got nervous. I didn't do anything wrong," he began to justify himself. "I didn't hurt anyone. Well, you have not physically harmed anyone, but all the women you stalked have moved out and run away from their homes under various pretexts." Olegario was silent. "Could you stop doing that? The stalking or the digging?" Olegario smiled for the first time. "Stop trying to see your wife in these girls." Sergio answered. I'm not trying. You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to lose someone close to you. You have no idea what it's like to lose the meaning of your life, to lose the person you lived for. I do understand. I'm a widower, too. Maybe it was easier for me if my wife died of cancer, and by the time she died, I had time to prepare myself mentally. Although, that's nonsense. You can't be prepared for that. And from what I understand, in your life, this tragedy happened unexpectedly." Olegario stared out the window. "Yes," he answered. "She was on her way to the doctor for a pregnancy checkup. I was busy that day, I had some work to do. And they didn't even call me. I got worried when she didn't come back in the evening. I started calling hospitals. Then I found a report on the internet, on the news. A truck drove into the oncoming traffic lane, the driver fell asleep at the wheel. My wife's car crashed over and hit a lamppost. Neither my wife nor my baby were saved. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago," Olegario shrugged and grimaced in pain. "Time does not heal," Sergio said quietly. "I didn't want to hurt those women," Olegario said. "What do you plan to do next?" "I plan to recover," Olegario smiled. "And then?" Sergio tried to lead his interlocutor to a specific thought. "I don't know. I don't know anything." "Will you start a new life?" "I don't know how." "Do you know how to start a new life alone, without the love of your life?" Olegario looked at Sergio, who didn't expect such a question. "Were you able to start a new life? Were you able to escape the past and start from scratch?" "Maybe," Sergio's voice trembled, and he felt he was lying. "Really? How?" Sergio was silent in response and didn't know what to say. 2 widowers lived in the same settlement, almost opposite each other, and neither of them knew how to go on living. "I just want to make sure," Sergio began, "that you stop digging tunnels under the plots and stalking people." "You can't either." "I can't what?" "What do you mean?" "Start a new life." "And you want me to start a new life?" "Maybe I just wanted to die in that tunnel." "Yeah, that's why you left yourself a lot of food and water." Olegario hesitated. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to sell the house and move out." But it's my house. This is my territory. I'm giving you a chance to start a new life. Sergio felt the tension. You should sell your house and move somewhere. And if you don't, I'll report you to the police. I have enough material to make a criminal case against you. Well, you'll file a report, so what? Is it a crime? Maybe I will have to pay a fine for digging tunnels, but no more than that. And then what? I will make sure that everyone in the settlement will know that you are stalking them. Olegario looked intently into Sergio's eyes. Thank you for bringing me some fruit, he finally replied. But now, please go away. Sergio understood that this was the end of their conversation. He said goodbye and left. Sergio went out, and suddenly he felt a lump in his throat, his eyes slightly stinging, as if someone had just hurt him badly. He felt the same way as a child when he had to stand up for his rights despite his inner weakness and fear. He got in the car, and his condition worsened. He was shaking, and he screamed, slammed his fists into the steering wheel several times, and then screamed again. Passers-by could not hear him, but saw the driver's strange, emotional, and even aggressive behavior and avoided the car. Sergio calmed down a little. He felt that Olegario had nothing to do with this conflict at all. It was only himself and his inner pain. He entered a new location in his GPS and drove according to the directions. It started to rain. The wet road serpentine led to the outskirts of the city, past an industrial area and some old buildings. Sergio parked and got out of the car. He went through an old gate and found himself in a very quiet place, among neat rows of trees. And there were monuments with pictures between the trees. He came to the cemetery. He walked slowly between the graves looking for the right one. He was holding a bouquet of flowers that his wife loved. He walked for a long time along the path and finally reached the grave. The last time he visited her grave was 3 years ago. The grave was ungroomed. Sergio stamped the grass with his foot and placed the flowers by the monument with the portrait of his beloved Nadi. He stood there with his mouth slightly open, wanting to say something, but he couldn't find the right words. Sergio knew why he had come. He should have done it a long time ago, but every time he tried to find reasons not to do it. The rain came down harder. Sergio stood without an umbrella and let himself get completely soaked to the skin. His inner pain seemed to subside with each drop, and the drops seemed to evaporate as they touched his skin. He squatted down and touched the portrait with his hand, running his palm over the picture of his wife. "I'm sorry, darling," he began. "I'm sorry for pretending all this time that you weren't in my life. Since you died, all I've done is run. I've been running from work, from friends, from relationships. I've been running from loved ones. I haven't visited my parents in a long time. I am very busy and at the same time not busy at all. There is no meaning in what I do. The only meaningful thing I did the other day was when I saved that guy. I don't know if you are watching me. If you do, you know everything. And if not, someday you'll read that story in my memoirs. I'm insanely tired of running. All this time I've been afraid to accept this fact. You're gone, and you won't be here anymore. The old me no longer exists either. I have changed, and my desires have changed. The world has changed, and maybe it's time for me to accept that. It's time to stop, to look around, to understand where I am and how to get out of here." Rain dripped down Sergio's cheeks, helping him to hide his tears. "To do that, I need to let you go. Say goodbye to you," Sergio said quietly. "I miss you so much. God, if you only knew how much I look for you in every woman, and I can't find you, because there's no one like you. All these girls are nice, but all this time it wasn't them I wanted, it was you. They were just a way to numb the pain. I live in the past." Sergio was silent again. "I rarely come here, I'm sorry. I love you very much. I appreciate every day we've lived together. And I am thankful for every happy moment. Thank you, my love, and goodbye." Sergio touched his lips and then lightly touched his wife's lips in the picture. Then he stood up, wiped his face from the raindrops, and walked away. The rain stopped, but he cried and sobbed and couldn't stop. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry, to let out the pain that had lodged in him and would not let him move on. Sergio returned to his apartment in the city and looked again at everything that somehow reminded him of his wife, her clothes, her shoes, souvenirs they had brought during their honeymoon. He took out his phone, took a few pictures, and wrote down memories for each picture. They were vivid snapshots of his life. He took them to a photo studio and they made a photo album there. There was no need to keep it in his head anymore, no need to be afraid that everything would be forgotten. Even if that apartment disappeared, he would remember the best of it. Sergio went through his belongings. It turned out that he didn't need a lot of it anymore and only kept it because Nadi loved it. He packed it all into boxes and decided either to sell it or give it away to friends and relatives. It was time to renovate the apartment. After about a month, he came back to the house out of the city. All this time he was busy with the apartment. He thought of what to fix and what to redo. He searched for professionals and bought materials. And now, when it was impossible to stay in the apartment because of the smell of glue and construction dust, he decided to come back to his house. There was a light on in Olegario's house. Sergio rang the bell at the gate, and the owner came out and opened it. He looked much better now. The cast had not yet been removed, but still he looked alive and moved quite briskly. "May I come in?" Sergio asked. "Come in," Olegario answered and went into the house. The guest followed him. They sat down in the kitchen. Olegario offered coffee, and Sergio said yes. "I hope you are not going to poison me," he joked. "That's not my style," Olegario answered calmly. "Why have you come here? Do you want to make sure that I didn't dig up anything else?" "Not really. I can't do that yet," Olegario pointed to his leg in a cast. "And anyway, I'm not going to dig any more tunnels. Did you take my advice?" "No, I just want to live. I noticed that you took my belongings on the second floor." "Only some of them," Sergio confessed. "Do you think I'm crazy?" "A little," Sergio shrugged and grinned. "I have only one question to ask. What are the tunnels for? Why did you dig them? If you wanted to follow the girls that badly, there are plenty of other ways." Olegario stopped talking and took a sip of coffee, then stood up suddenly. "Let's go," he said. "I will show you." Olegario came out of the kitchen, and Sergio followed him. "Where are we going?" "To your house," Olegario answered. He took the crowbar and went outside. "And what do you want to show me in my house?" Sergio was intrigued. "You will see. In the meantime, tell me, how do you know Maruja? Did you meet her when she was selling the house or before?" "Before. We used to date for a while." "How long ago?" "A few years ago." "So did we." "Really?" "Yeah, I was the one who recommended this house to her. I thought she found it on her own. She and I even came here." "Oh, so you had a relationship with her after me?" Sergio was upset by that fact. They went inside. Olegario confidently made his way to the stairs and walked down to the basement, where Sergio kept his belongings. The floor was covered with carpeting. "You see," Olegario began, "these houses are all built according to the same plan. They may look different, but they're identical in construction. My friend was in charge of the foundation works, so I know it for sure. I did the master plan. Every house has a basement area. You can make a gym or even a swimming pool there. Just in case, we added another space under every house." With these words, he walked to the edge of the carpet and began to roll it up, revealing a concrete slab. There was a hatch in the center of it. "What is it?" Sergio asked. "What do you think it is?" Olegario answered and turned the door handle. The lid of the hatch did not lift up, but moved aside, which made it easy to open it, even from the inside. Sergio saw a vertical ladder there. "Is there another tunnel?" "Almost," Olegario answered. Slowly, clinging with his other hand, he walked down. Sergio followed him. They entered an underground room. It was enclosed, with no openings, but nothing prevented them from digging themselves a corridor or even a passage to another house. I had an affair with all the girls you saw in my album. Not at the same time, but at different periods. And these tunnels allowed me to visit them even when they didn't know about it. That's not really ethical. I don't like being cheated on. What do you mean? Do you think I kept an eye on them only? Olegario laughed, and at that moment, Sergio felt a little uncomfortable. I kept an eye on their men. And if I saw that these women were cheating on me, I took note of their boyfriends. And what did you do with them? I'd go to their house secretly through the underground passage, and... Olegario stared at Sergio. I killed them. Sergio thought he misheard. But when he was about to ask again, Olegario swung at him with a crowbar in his right hand. Sergio managed to move away, but the blow hit his shoulder, and a deafening pain rolled down his back. Sergio cried out, and Olegario took another swing. This time there was no time to hesitate. Sergio pushed the attacker away with his foot, and as soon as he was about to hit him again, he grabbed the crowbar with both hands, preventing him from getting any closer. Olegario had some kind of crazy beastly vigor. It was unclear where it came from in such a skinny and exhausted body. Why are you doing this? Sergio shouted. Maruja is mine. Olegario only answered in a fierce voice. But we broke up a long time ago, and she moved to another city. Go ahead, take action, find her if you need her so much. It is a matter of principle, Olegario said. And besides, now you know too much. I saved you. You shouldn't have saved me. Olegario responded, snatched the crowbar from Sergio's hands, and hit him in the face with it, causing Sergio to fall to the wet ground, spitting up blood. The next blow was to be the last. Olegario leaned over Sergio's head and swung, but Sergio managed to dodge and stuck his knife, which he always had with him, into his attacker's leg. Olegario screamed and dropped the crowbar. Sergio jumped up and hit him sharply in the injured rib. Olegario fell over. It was hard for him to breathe. Sergio grabbed the crowbar and climbed out. As Olegario cried out, he slammed the hatch shut and put the crowbar in the handle so that it couldn't be opened from the inside. Sergio was breathing heavily, and he could hear Olegario screaming from below. It was unclear what he was saying, but Sergio didn't want to check that. Sergio took out his phone and called the police. The police car arrived an hour later. By then the cries were over. When they went into the basement and opened the cover, Olegario was not there. It was unclear where he had gone. Sergio told everything he knew. His testimony was recorded, and the investigator opened a criminal case. Sergio cemented the hatch in the floor, and other residents of the settlement did the same. Soon there were rumors that, supposedly, sometimes at night, screams and crowbar blows could be heard under the floor. But Sergio didn't really believe it. He decided to sell this unfortunate house, took a vacation, and left on a trip. For the first time in years, there was nothing holding him back. He wasn't sure he'd return to the city, despite his medical career. And the house could be sold remotely. He was a very talented surgeon with a brilliant reputation. He could find a job in any city. In the meantime, he decided to visit his parents, explore the country, and maybe meet someone special. He realized that he needed a woman who was different from Maruja, and even different from Nadi. Finally, he was ready to meet a woman with whom he would build a relationship step by step, without fear of failure or crisis. He was only 40, and he had just as much ahead of him if his health was good. The train was carrying him forward, toward the unknown future he had been waiting for. A beautiful stranger entered the train, and Sergio realized that this journey was the most right and meaningful thing he had done in recent years. He put the book aside, smiled at the girl, and introduced himself. The conversation began, life went on, and the past was left behind.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.